Hi there, I'm Wendy McCallum, burnout and alcohol coach and wellness expert, and you're listening to Bite Size Balance, where everyday extraordinary women share their stories, expertise, and wisdom, all in the name of lifting each other up and creating a better life by design. Whether it's wellness, career, relationships, food, alcohol, mindfulness, hormones, or parenting, we talk about all things women's balance. If your life looks great on paper, but it still feels like something's missing, you're in the right place. Welcome to Bite Size Balance.
Before we get to today's episode, which is a really juicy one, I wanted to make a little announcement. Now, today's episode is a different episode. I am actually taking the role of guest on. So I'm moving out of my host chair. I have a guest host in the house who's going to be interviewing me, and I'm going to be telling my personal story around alcohol and how I eventually made positive change in that area and got to a place where alcohol became small and irrelevant in my life. So I think today's episode is going to resonate with a lot of you. I'm really excited about it. I also, though, wanted to let you know that I have something really cool coming up that is available to all of you guys. So anybody who's listening can register for this offering. So what I'm going to be doing is a completely free 1-hour class. It's going to be a coaching session in that I'm going to be talking about the 5 secrets to drinking less and living more as I see them. So those are the 5 big things that need to be present in order for you to get to a place where alcohol is small and irrelevant for you and you feel real freedom from it, where you can truly take it or leave it. And these 5 components are things that are not present in a lot of the approaches that we commonly take to try to make change in relation to our alcohol habits. So I think it's going to be really interesting and really eye-opening for all of you who take the time to listen to it. So that is a coaching class with a Q&A that's taking place on February 9th at 1 p.m. Atlantic. That's noon Eastern time. So again, that's February 9th. It's Tuesday at 1 p.m. Atlantic and noon Eastern time. There will be a recorded replay. So if you can't attend the actual webinar, that's okay. Still sign up, please. Register for it and you will receive the replay by email shortly after it is recorded. You'll also have the opportunity to submit your questions in advance. So I'm going to include a form that's going to allow you to send in any questions that you have around alcohol that you would like for me to answer. I'm going to do my best to answer as many of them as I can in the 1 hour that I'm live. And even if you can't participate in the live webinar and you send me a question, if I can answer it, you'll be able to see my answer in the replay that arrives in your inbox later on that day. So if you're interested in this free class, there are 0 strings attached. I promise you that. It's just an opportunity for me to get this message out that I'm so darn passionate about around achieving freedom from alcohol and getting out of the just so demoralizing and self-destructive cycle of shame and blame and setting rules for yourself and making deals with yourself and then breaking them, that I really encourage you to register for this class now. Don't lose your spot. Spots are limited because it's a live interactive class. So it's www.wendymccallum.com/webinar. To register, that's www.wendymccallum.com/webinar. And again, it's taking place on February 9th at 1 p.m. Atlantic. You can absolutely register and not attend the live and get the replay sent to your inbox at a later date. So I hope to see many of you there. And that's it for me today. Thank you so much, as always, for listening to this podcast, spreading the good word about it, leaving reviews for me on iTunes. I appreciate all of you, and I hope that you enjoy today's episode. Hi, everybody. I am here today with a really special episode. I am excited. I'm slightly nervous, but I'm in very good hands today. I have a guest host today who's actually going to host this podcast. It's not going to be me because today I am actually the guest on my own podcast. So I have with me today my really very, very good friend and a person who has just been one of my biggest supporters when it comes to both me going alcohol free, me building the business that I have as a coach, and in particular, my decision to actually get certified as a This Naked Mind coach. One of my favorite people in the world, Julie Lesperance. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you. It's an honor to get to interview you today. This will be very, very interesting. And thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to learn more about your journey. And even though we've known each other for years, I'm I'm excited to just ask these questions and get to know my friend just that little bit much better.
Yeah, it's going to be good. Julie is an HR specialist, by the way, so she's a really great question asker. This is part of her job, and so I'm in really great hands today. I actually just said before we got on, I think I'm going to take my glasses off, which makes it impossible for me to read any notes, and that means that I have to just go with the flow today, which I think will probably lead to the best possible outcome in terms of this podcast. So I am officially taking my glasses off. If you're not watching the video, my glasses are coming off now, and I'm ready to go.
So, I mean, I think one of the things that is really interesting about our relationship, Wendy, if I may start with that, is that you and I have known each other for years. We've been part of a group of friends, I want to say 15 years, maybe longer than that. And for the longest while, we saw each other kind of, just from time to time, once a month when this group would get together. And so it's been really lovely to have our friendship deepen over the past 3 years, I would say, where we've kind of interacted more kind of on a deeper level. And so I just want to reiterate that I really appreciate having an opportunity to get to know you better and to have your trust as we walk through these questions that are just very personal to you, but I just can only imagine how helpful they'll be to everyone who's listening. So when I thought of some things I wanted to ask you, I guess the first thing I wanted to know was, I understand that you're 3 years alcohol free, just very recently. So can you tell me a little bit more about why you decided to do the podcast? Why did you decide to do this in the first place?
Yeah, it's interesting, Julie. That's a great question because this podcast is really all about that. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to tell you my personal alcohol story. And for many of the people listening to this podcast, they probably never heard it. This podcast is not just about alcohol. We talk about all kinds of other things on here, but this is such a big piece of my own personal balance and my own story. And also a huge piece of what I do as a coach that I felt like I needed to share this story here. So that's one of the reasons for the podcast. But the bigger question is, why did I decide to do it now on my 3rd anniversary? And the answer to that is my 3rd anniversary was actually last week, and it went by relatively unnoticed. Nobody in my family knew it was my anniversary. I don't talk about it. And I don't really mark it in any way. There was certainly no big celebration. In fact, my husband took my sister out for dinner that night, which is kind of funny. I stayed home and ate leftovers, and they went out together because they were celebrating a milestone of their own as business partners. Anyway, so it was really not a big deal last week, but I started thinking about it and I realized that it was really important that I actually did mark it somehow. First of all, I wanted to tell my story because I know that in telling my story today, I'm going to help somebody out there, because every time I hear someone else's story about alcohol, it helps me. And it's certainly one of the main reasons why I started questioning my relationship with alcohol and actually made the decision to go alcohol free. So I want to tell my story, but it's also really important to make sure that you celebrate your successes as a human being. And I am just a human and I forget to do that just like everybody else does. And so part of the purpose behind this podcast was for me to actually celebrate the achievement of being happily alcohol-free for 3 years, because we know that when it comes to forming new habits and maintaining them, emotion is a really big piece of that. And when we can access and incorporate a positive emotion with any element of change as humans, that change is far more likely to stick and stay. So it's important to celebrate your successes. And that's why I'm doing this podcast. And I thought, well, why not have Julie on? Because I needed somebody I didn't want to get on here and just have a big monologue for an hour about my journey and my story. And you're just the perfect person to do this, Julie, because honestly, there is not anybody else in my life who has been as supportive as you have around this decision, and who has been as understanding around it as you have. So I am so happy to have you here to help me get this story out in this podcast. Well, by the way, I put my glasses back on. If anyone's watching this, I put my glasses back on, not because I want to look at my notes, but because I can't see Julie without them, because I'm old and I need my reading glasses for everything now. So my glasses are back on.
Oh my gosh, that's too funny. Well, thanks for opening up about that. And, one of the things that you and I as friends, and also you have talked about was the fact that it is important to tell your story, because when people identify with someone like you, especially someone like you who, it has a public platform at all. It's so easy for us to think, well, this person has it all together, and so on. And the reality is, none of us have it all together. I certainly don't. And it makes it just showing some vulnerability allows people in. And when you allow people in, you just create a really different life for yourself. And one of the things I've noticed, since you've been on this journey, is I have watched you kind of unfold and open up. And of course, that's a little bit of where our friendship blossomed even further, which is great. I'm curious to know, though, I don't know if I've ever even asked you this question, but when did you start drinking? So when did this all start for you? You and I both have children that are teenagers. I'm just curious, when did it start for you? Is it something you started young? Did it start later? Did it just creep up?
I think my story, honestly, is pretty much the same as most people's stories up until a certain point. So I started drinking, I think the first time I drank, I was 15 years old. I was in grade 10. I drank with a friend of mine. We mixed a bunch of hard liquor together in a jar and drank it in the bus on the way to the school dance. Terrible idea, got really sick. It was just one of those experiences. I think a lot of people have that as their first alcohol experience. I hated the taste. I got really sick. I got in big trouble because I got caught. And it was really embarrassing for my family and embarrassing for me. And I don't think I drank very much after that, to be honest. In high school, I drank occasionally after that, but I learned my lesson from that. And then I went to university. I did my undergrad. I drank like most kids do in university. We would go out once a week and I would drink beer or whatever with a group of people. And then moved from undergrad, moved into law school, kind of the same thing in law school. We were too busy studying and trying to get through law school to drink very much. But when we did drink, we tended to binge drink, and it was maybe once a week that happened. What wasn't happening in either high school or in university for me was any drinking outside of social, like purely social drinking. So I was not drinking by myself ever, and I definitely wasn't drinking during the daytime. It was always happening at night. That did not really start to shift until I started practicing law. And that's kind of like the next level for me.
And I'm curious, so as you're talking through it, you said that the first time you drank, you didn't really like the taste of it. You got caught. Like, when you think about it, that was a little bit like my first experience too. But what kept you going back? Was it a deliberate choice? I mean, I guess that's something I'm really curious about. Was it just kind of being a part of the group, or what was it that kept you going even just during those periods, which I agree with you. Most of us will identify with that being a very similar version of our first time.
Yeah, drinking. 100% to be part of the group when I think back on it. And that's not me placing blame anywhere except on myself, I guess. But, I was a kid and I wanted to have friends and have fun and have good social experiences. And that was just part of a lot of the social experiences for me. But it was not motivated by me thinking, oh, I need this drink in order to, relax or let loose or whatever. It was just what everybody was doing. And so I did it too. Yeah. So the motivation at that point was absolutely social. Yeah.
How did your relationship with alcohol change over time? So how did it morph from being something social and kind of to something that was more than that for you?
Well, I think it started to shift when I started practicing law. So I moved from Halifax, which is where I'm from, which is where you and I are coming to everybody from now, because I've now moved back here. But I left Halifax after law school and I moved across the country to Calgary, Alberta, and I started practicing law out there in a large corporate commercial law firm. Had a really great job. It was a really great firm. I worked with lots of amazing people. But there were a couple problems with it. One, I didn't love what I did. So it, in hindsight, was not really the right career for me. So I wasn't really feeling resonant in my career choice, but the bigger issue when it came to alcohol was that alcohol was a really big piece of practicing law. It was a big piece of the marketing side of it. It was everywhere. I was, for the first time ever, finding myself drinking at lunchtime with clients, for example. Actually, I think when I look back on it, it was the first time I really drank red wine, which became my drink of choice. Up until that point, I only ever really drank beer, and occasionally I think a glass of white wine, but I didn't even really like white wine. That's when I started to get pulled into this culture of wine, good wine being kind of sophisticated and part of being in the corporate world, and just started drinking more as a result of that. That would be when I started drinking during the day. Not all the time, but I was going out for lunch with clients. We would order a bottle of wine and we would share. We would all have a glass of wine with lunch, something I had never done before. And also any nighttime marketing events always included wine. There was what we called the Lawyer's Lounge at the firm that I worked at, which was open. I think it was Thursdays after work. It opened up at maybe 4, and it was just a fully stocked bar, and you just showed up and everybody just drank whatever they wanted. And it was a social event for the lawyers that often led to us going out afterwards and continuing to drink. So it became part of my work life when I was practicing as a lawyer, but it still was not a big part of my home life. So I wasn't taking that home very often. It kind of moved to a new level when I had kids. And I think this is a very common for women. And that's why I want to really spend some time on this, because what happened when I became a mom is that my social life disappeared, which happens for most of us. So I had, as some people listening to this podcast are probably aware, and Julie, I know you know this, but I'm going to tell it again. We were trying to have kids for a while. We had real difficulty starting a family. We had been thinking about adoption since actually before we started trying to have kids. And so at a certain point, we decided, well, we're gonna pursue adoption because this is kind of heartbreaking. We'd had a few losses. And so we started the adoption process, and we were lucky enough about a year later to be chosen by a wonderful birth mother. And our son, Duncan, was born in November of 2003. At the time, I was pregnant. I was 9 weeks pregnant again. Now, I didn't think that pregnancy was going to take, because I'd had bad luck in the past with pregnancies, but I was pregnant when he was born. What happened was I made partner about 2 months after he was born. So the partners in litigation pulled me in and said, we'd like to make you a partner. At the time, I didn't have a lot of choice as to whether I said yes or not. If I'd said no, I probably would have had to go look for another job. So I took the partnership and told them I was pregnant, obviously, but also said, I don't know whether I'll actually have this baby. And what ended up happening was I did end up having that baby. So I had a baby 7 months later. So I had 2 babies within 7 months, and I made partner at this large law firm, which is a ton of added responsibility in between these 2 babies. So my life went from like normal lawyer stress, which is actually pretty high, to insane stress in a very short period of time. And also, because I had these 2 babies pretty much back to back, I didn't go anywhere for years. Like for 3 years, I would just work and come home. And, my mom used to call me and she'd say, how's it going today? And I'd say, well, they're still alive, and that was my main objective on those days. The point of this is to say, I was no longer drinking for social reasons because I wasn't socializing. So at this point, I was not drinking when my kids were really little. There wasn't alcohol around. I just wasn't drinking. But at some point, I started drinking alcohol at home. And it happened after I had the kids. And this is really where I think things started to go downhill for me in terms of my relationship with alcohol. I used to switch with my neighbor, Karen. Karen, if you're listening, I love you. Karen and I used to switch babysitting. So she would come and babysit one Friday night, and then the next night I would go over and babysit her son. And she often would leave. She knew I liked red wine, and she would often leave a nice bottle of red wine for me with usually a bag of chips or something. And I would leave her some treats at my house. She wasn't a drinker, but I would leave her some treats when she babysat for me. And that was the very first time that I drank wine by myself, was at Karen's house. Karen, it's not your fault. It's my fault. If you're listening, but I used to drink a couple of glasses of wine at her house on Friday night by myself, because I would have worked all week and I was exhausted, and I would sit there and it just felt so adult, to be able to sit there and have this glass of wine by myself without anybody, crying or needing their diaper changed or whatever. And so I think that that's really where it started to shift. Eventually that led to me sometimes buying wine and bringing it home and drinking wine, with my husband or whatever. We would drink at night, might have a glass of wine or 2. I wasn't drinking on weekdays then. I would only drink on the weekends, and it would probably just be a couple of glasses of wine if I had it. So it was not a problem at all, but that's when it shifted from social drinking to, I don't know what you call it, but it's definitely not social drinking, antisocial drinking, drinking by yourself.
Sounds like the way you described that you had these little, boxes where you were like, well, it's not during the day. Well, it's not a weekday. Oh, well, this is, almost like it had constructed, you had constructed kind of what a problem would be. And none of these things fell into something that was going to be a challenge.
100%. Yeah. It did not feel problematic whatsoever. And honestly, it really wasn't problematic. It was very sporadic, but I continued to do that. And so we stayed in Calgary for another, I think 4 years maybe after that. And I continued working, and it was very busy and lots and lots of stress involved in trying to parent 2 toddlers and also practice law at this level. So it was very, very stressful. I did keep drinking. Obviously at work, I kept drinking all the same marketing. In fact, that stuff just ramped up because the more senior you got at the law firm, the more marketing things you were invited to, and the more alcohol, was part of that. When I finally made the decision to leave law, which was the best decision I ever made for me, really tough decision, and moved back to Nova Scotia, there was a shift in my alcohol usage because I was no longer drinking at work, obviously. So it wasn't part of work anymore. Came back to Nova Scotia, and I took a year off with my kids before they started primary here. So I had 1 year with my 2 4-year-olds where I was home, and it was my first time as as a stay-at-home mom, and I was in kind of the mom world, and I really loved it. I thought it was fantastic. I was so excited to have this opportunity, but unfortunately, the timing of me becoming a stay-at-home mom, I'm putting that in air quotes because it really only lasted for a couple of years, but being at home with my kids, the timing of that coincided almost exactly with the beginning of what I now know was mummy wine culture, which is a really big deal. That's something I've talked about on this podcast before. That started in the early 2000s, and I had my kids in 2003, 2004. So when I came home, mummy wine culture was really ramping up. And so when I went to play dates or, mom groups or book clubs, you and I are in the same book club, there's always wine there, or Splurge Club or any of that, it always involved alcohol. So now I was back in that social world where alcohol was a part of my social life. It was no longer part of my work life, but it was part of my social life. And it seemed so normal because everybody was doing it. So everywhere I went, there was, it's brunch, we're having mimosas, or, we're at the kid's birthday party and they've got wine for the parents. And, all of these things that were brand new experiences for me, but wine was really normalized in those as, just something everybody was doing. So I really didn't second guess it then. I just kind of went with the flow. It was fun. And for the first time in a long time, I was feeling relatively relaxed. I was coming out of burnout at this time too, because I didn't realize this until afterwards. I had gone through a real physical burnout as well during those last 5 years when I was, after I was made partner and I was raising the 2 babies. So I was kind of coming out of that physical burnout too. And I was just kind of having the time of my life because everything was easy for the first time ever. And I started, thinking about what I wanted to do in terms of a business. And that's when I went back to school and did my natural nutrition certification and started coaching. And for the first 7 or 8 years of coaching, I was drinking. This was part of my life. And it started to ramp up as life got tougher. And this is the other piece that I really want people to understand with alcohol. I often get asked by my clients, what is it? Why is it that some people can take or leave alcohol? It's not a problem for them. I see them out, they have a couple drinks with their friends, and then, they don't seem to want any more, and it doesn't seem to be problematic in any way for them. And I can't do that. And the answer is usually this. At some point, you went from using alcohol as a social tool to using alcohol as a form of medication. So at whatever point that was where you decided that you were going to use alcohol to help you feel better, there was a switch that flipped, and it took you out of the category of casual drinker, somebody who can take it or leave it, into a different category. And that is what happened with me. And it happened when my dad got sick, which is something I don't think I've talked about very much on this podcast, but my dad, Julie, I think you know this story, but my dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease about, well, he was diagnosed the year my son was born. My son's 17 now, so 17 years ago. And he lived with fairly well with Parkinson's disease for a long time. And then I don't remember the year. Well, I know it was actually 4 years ago this month, because it popped up in my Facebook memories. My sister and I took a trip to Mexico together. And
I remember the tears.
And we were having a great time. I was still drinking then. We were having a great time on our all-inclusive trip by ourselves, our sister Moon. And we got a call or a message from my mom to say something was wrong with Dad. They were in Florida at the time, where they go every winter. And my mom was obviously panicked. And we got on the phone with her and tried to figure out what was going on. And long story short, my dad had been hospitalized suddenly because he had just had a real decline in his condition. And they thought that it was related to that he may have had a virus or cold or something that kind of triggered it. But he was, he had just a real setback in terms of his neurological capabilities. So he was not himself, and they'd had to hospitalize him in Florida, and my mom did not know what to do. So my sister and I left Mexico early, got on a plane, flew directly to Florida, and kind of went into this, what we didn't know at the time, but what turned into a full 2 years, really, 2 calendar years of just incredibly intense stress. So Dad was there, and we were there for, I think, 9 days before we flew home. Dad stayed for several weeks because we couldn't get him medevaced home. Finally got the medevac organized and a bed for him here in a hospital in Halifax, and we got him moved back here. He was in the hospital for 4 months. He had acute, gosh, I always forget the word for it. When you're confused, people get it with
dementia.
Yes, no. Old people get it all the time with UTIs, and for some reason I have a mental block on the word, and I can never remember what it is, but it'll come to me.
Yeah.
Where you're completely out of it, so you don't know what end is up. You're confused. You're having delusions. He was in that state for a full 4 months, and we didn't know if he was going to come out. He got diagnosed in the hospital with something called Lewy body disease, which is kind of my understanding is it's kind of a sister disease to Parkinson's. So it presents in a lot of the same ways, but it's very different in terms of how it progresses. And we were given a diagnosis at some point that Dad probably would only live for another year, maybe 18 months. And during the course of this, that is when the switch flipped for me. So this is the time in my life where I started using alcohol as a way to cope. So the switch flipped. I was no longer using it for social, to have fun and, just feel good. I was using it to actually escape, numb out, not deal with some of the stuff that was going on. So when Dad was in the hospital for those 4 months, I would come home every day after the hospital, and I would eat dinner, whatever, and always have a glass of wine, usually more than one glass of wine. And over the course of that time, it started increasing how much I was drinking. And I started realizing I was feeling really crappy. And I guess that went on probably for another 6 months or so. Dad was released from the hospital, went home. My mom was his primary caregiver. It was very difficult for her. We had all kinds of help coming in. Eventually, we got to the point where he needed almost 24-hour. My mom needed support for most of the day. So it turned into quite a big deal. It was very much out of the blue. Nobody was expecting it. And we just found ourselves in it, and we had to deal with it. And my drinking escalated that year as a coping mechanism. We went for a follow-up appointment with my dad to the doctor at some point, and I asked the very direct question, how long is he going to live? And they said, probably not more than a year. And they said, we don't know how it's going to happen, but there's going to be an intervening event at some point, and that is going to lead to the end of your dad's life. So he's either going to fall, or he'll get pneumonia or a virus, and his body won't be able to handle it. So we had 1 year left with my dad, and this is when I really had kind of a reckoning with myself. So I had been questioning my relationship with alcohol for several years. So I'm the kind of person who's very in tune with my body, which probably won't surprise anybody. I'm a wellness coach. So, I eat really, really well. I exercise regularly. I, think of myself as somebody who's pretty mindful, and I'd come out of this burnout and spent a lot of time and energy creating this balance in my life so that I never got burnt out again. But the alcohol piece was never fit with that. it just felt really out of place. It felt really wrong. I knew it wasn't healthy. I had developed incredible anxiety around alcohol, to the point where even if I just had a couple glasses of wine, I would be up in the middle of the night really freaking out about that. So I would get up and I would start Googling, am I an alcoholic? I'd be looking at gray area drinking, trying to figure out plans and ways to moderate. I had already at this point been through probably at least a year of making up rules for myself and breaking them time and time again. So those things that you were talking about earlier in terms of the categories, those had now become rules for me as to whether or not my drinking was acceptable or not acceptable. So if I, for example, I couldn't drink during the daytimes, then I would start making rules. Well, I'm only going to drink from Thursday to Sunday. I would make rules around how many drinks I could have. So I'm only going to have 2 glasses max of wine when I drink. And then I would break all the rules. So I had been in that cycle that so many women find themselves in, of making rules and breaking them and then feeling guilty and ashamed of that. And then making a new rule for the next night and then breaking that again. I'd been in that cycle for forever. So when they told me that Dad only had 1 year left to live, I think that was really a kind of a come to Jesus moment for me. Can I say that in a totally non-religious way, if that's possible? Because I'm not religious. But it was a moment, it was a real reckoning for me. I realized I have 1 year left with my dad, and I can spend the year trying to numb out from this, or I can spend the year with him. And I decided to stop drinking. And I stopped drinking. I had 4 days under my belt of not drinking, which frankly was not unusual. I did that all the time. I'd do dry Januaries. I'd do, cleanses where I didn't drink. And so anybody who's listening to this podcast, if you've fallen into the trap I fell into, where I felt like I could control alcohol because I could stop.
Right.
You want to be really careful about that. Because the truth is, every time I did a dry January or a cleanse, I couldn't wait till it was over and I could have a glass of wine. So technically I could stop, but there was no freedom in it for me, none. Anyway, I was on a self-imposed wine fast. I'd been on it for 4 days, and I was going to get an MRI in Yarmouth, which is the other end of my province. It's a 4-hour drive. I was driving by myself, and I wanted to download an audiobook to listen to for the drive. And for whatever reason that day, I found Annie Grace's This Naked Mind. I downloaded it and I listened to it all the way to Yarmouth. And when I was lying in the MRI tube, I was thinking to myself, I can't wait to finish this book. Got back in the car, listened to it all the way home, and haven't had a drink since. It hasn't been easy, or it wasn't in the early days anyway. It wasn't easy, but it was 100% fueled by what I heard when I listened to This Naked Mind. And that really had a big impact on my thinking about alcohol. So that was a long answer, Julie, to whatever the question was you asked me 20 minutes ago, but sorry about that.
Taking on every word, because, as your friend, there's a couple of things that strike me in what you've just said. Well, the first thing is we talked about being in a book club together, which means that every month how long has this book club been going on? Like 13 years, 15 years? I can't remember.
I've only been in it for maybe 11 years because I've only been back in Nova Scotia for 11. So I think you and I have known each other for around 11 years. Yeah.
Okay. So for 11 years, I would pretty much see you every month, at least one night a month for the most part. Let's say you skipped a few nights. I've known you more intimately now for 3 years. And, I had no idea you were going through all of this with your dad. I knew your dad wasn't well, but when I think about those nights where we would all gather and have a dinner and have wine and so on, there's 12 of us there, or 11 of us, or however many. And, we don't go deep. We don't talk about all these things. Like I knew your dad wasn't well. And, something I didn't share with you, I'll share it with you now, is I remember once, and it was close to right before your dad passed. And I remember going to your house and dropping off some poinsettias. Remember, my daughter was selling some for dance. And I remember, and I said, I'm just going to leave them here. I tried to get in touch with you. Didn't want these things to die. I'm just going to drop them off on your front porch. And I remember it took a while for the doorbell to get answered, which was not a big deal. I was just going to leave them and go. And I remember you showing up in a beautiful dress. You were having a family dinner, and you said, I'm so sorry. It took a little while longer answer the door. There's something going on with my dad. And I don't know what was going on, or maybe there was an episode or something had happened, but I just remember how composed and polite and kind you were, and so appreciative to support my daughters who you barely knew at the time. And I had no idea all of this was going on. So I don't know how I don't know how I didn't realize all of this. I wish I had been more there for you. That was the thought that was running through my mind.
Oh, well,
I share that, but yeah.
You do not need to worry about that. I was pretty private about this, and I don't remember exactly what was happening at that moment when you showed. I do remember you coming to the door. We had lots of really tough moments with my dad. I also wasn't, in your defense, Julie, I probably wasn't coming to book club very much that year. Yeah. That's my guess. I was pretty worn down, trying to take care of my dad, but not mostly, but also my mom. It was a really tough year for my mom and my sister. The four of us were kind of in it. We're a small family, and we all live here. So we were really in it in our own little bubble that year, in terms of trying to cope with all of this stuff. But for me, it very much was that, I think, that experience that shifted me from the social drinking to drinking becoming problematic. And again, the switch that flipped was, for the first time ever, I was using it as a tool, as medication, as a way to cope. And that's when it becomes increasingly difficult to pull yourself away from it.
So did you ever, I don't, you and I have had conversations. I'm someone who is able to have a drink or two. I'm not a heavy drinker. But I'm curious to know, did you ever, you use the words often like that, I didn't have a good relationship with alcohol and so on. And yet, if I was ever to do research about this, that you're either an alcoholic or you're not, you're living in this gray zone. Did you see yourself as, this is not how I feel, I'm just saying that this is kind of, the information you can get more readily available to you. Did you see yourself as an alcoholic at that time?
No.
I know your choice of words, and I think I'm curious.
It's an important question, because I think, unfortunately, and I've talked about this before, if you're listening to this podcast or you like it, you can go and listen to the episode that I did with Annie Grace on this podcast. We talked about this, I think, and also I was a guest on her podcast and we talked about it there. But I think it's really important that we are very careful with that word alcoholic, because it has some pretty intense connotations to it. And there is no real definition of alcoholic. This is the problem. So there's no definition of it. And as you said, for a very long time, it's been the case, and I'm sure you see this in HR, this probably comes up in HR all the time in your job, but it's been the case that you're either an alcoholic, in which case you need help, and the help is, largely either rehab or AA or some combination of those things, right? Or you're not an alcoholic. And I think that's a really dangerous dichotomy. I think it's not serving the majority of drinkers, because the truth is the majority of drinkers don't fall into kind of the classic, again, it's not really a definition, but there's sort of a test for alcoholism. And I used to go do that test, Julie. I've done it many times online. I would do it at 3:00 in the morning. I'd do the test for alcoholic, and there are all these questions they ask you, is it interfering with your work? Is it, affecting your ability to do X? Are you drinking during the daytime? A bunch of questions. And my answers on that test always gave the answer, no, you're not an alcoholic. And so I think one of the reasons why it took me so long to change this really unhappy piece of my life, and to make change with it, is because I was looking to these objective tests to tell me whether or not I had a problem. And I think we have to stop doing that. I think we have to get away from the objective criteria for whether this is a problem or not. We also have to stop listening to other people who say to us, it's not a problem. I had so many people, when I stopped drinking, say, why? What was the problem? I didn't understand. This doesn't seem like you had a problem, truthfully, I know a lot of people who drink more than I ever drank. And, I also used that as a reason to not change my relationship with alcohol. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what other people think. It doesn't matter whether you meet the objective criteria. It doesn't matter whether you drink less or more than other people. The only thing that matters is whether you're happy with your relationship with alcohol. As soon as you start to question it, there's a problem.
Yeah.
I always say that to my clients. Like, if you're questioning it, there's a problem here, you know? And there's an interesting statistic around this, actually.
Oh.
Well, I don't know if it's actually directly on this, but and I'm probably getting the numbers a little bit wrong, so nobody quote me on this, but I think it's 84% of North Americans drink, and it's around 71% of those people who are actually questioning their relationship with alcohol and wish they drank less. So the majority of people drink, and the majority of the majority wish they drank less. Right? Unfortunately, only a small percentage of those people probably would fall into that classic kind of test for alcoholic, right? So many of us are getting stuck in these patterns that aren't serving us, that don't make us feel good. For me, it was literally destroying me. It felt like it was destroying my soul. I was like a small part of the person that I am when I was drinking, because I was so anxious and stressed out about it all the time. And I was somebody who had never, ever battled anxiety. I'm very lucky that way. I've never had anxiety as part of my life, but it was very real and very, very big for me. And it was affecting everything in my life, even though, again, many people would have said, why would you stop drinking? You don't have a problem. This isn't problematic drinking. Here's the other thing I want to say, Julie. I was drinking most nights, not every night, but most nights. Oftentimes I just have a couple glasses of wine. That I wasn't drinking, like bottles of wine every night. I have a couple glasses of wine. The truth is, I was classified as a heavy drinker. If you drink 2 glasses of wine a night as a female, on average, so average it out over the week, maybe during weekdays you don't drink very much, but on the weekends you always have 3 or 4 glasses of wine on Friday and Saturday night. You're a heavy drinker. Anything over 1 glass of wine a night puts you in the heavy drinker category. So that's more than 7 glasses, 4-ounce glasses, by the way, not the big 8-ouncers that you get at, that you get at Moxie's. That's not what I'm talking about. So, our definitions, even our social definitions, are also off in terms of the harm that we are causing ourselves. So it's a great question. The answer is no. I don't identify as an alcoholic. I don't say I'm an alcoholic. I say I am somebody for whom alcohol at a certain point started taking more than it was giving. And I decided to let go of it. And what I discovered is that my life is infinitely better without it. And I have no desire to ever go back.
Yeah. There's something in the world of HR. It's called, you probably talked about it with your community. It's called confirmation bias. And so, when you're doing those tests that are supposedly objective, if you get an answer that kind of confirms the path you want to go down, you start accumulating all those things that confirm the way you want to go. And then all of a sudden the way you want to go is confirmed. And so I was thinking of that as you were mentioning this, but you talked about the fact that, in the world of HR, I probably have seen this, and that was one of the reasons I was asking. Time and time again over the course of my career, I've had employees come to me, whether it was for them or even their spouse or someone they're close to. I need some help. I am out of control, or I feel out of control, or my spouse is out of control. And what's really unfortunate is that I always take people where they are without judgment at all. And the interesting thing is that when you look for solutions, there aren't really many until you get to the point where you've taken it too far. And so I could see it being really easy to say, well, they're saying the quizzes or the society or it is saying I don't have a problem because I have to be here to have a problem. Mm-hmm. So I'm probably fine. And as someone who was really trying to lend support, it was even more challenging because there aren't that many resources. There are many great resources, but often there's not that resource where someone can really identify with the place they're at, which is, this doesn't feel right to me and I don't really want to keep going with this, but I don't know what to do. So, I think that's a really, and how do you find you got freedom from alcohol? So you mentioned about how you took that drive. I can just visualize you taking that drive and listening to all those words. I also think audiobooks have a really interesting life of their own, especially was it read by Annie Grace too?
It
Do you
was.
remember?
And I want everybody listening to know this about my friend Julie.
Uh-oh.
My friend Julie, as far as I'm aware, and maybe other friends out there listening who can contradict me on this, is the only person in my life who actually took the time to read This Naked Mind so that she could understand what I was talking about when I was talking about all of the, limiting beliefs that I had about alcohol that kept me stuck and how free I felt from it now. And I was talking about cognitive dissonance and all of these things that come up in This Naked Mind. Julie actually got the bloody book. And did you listen to it or did you read it?
I listened to it, and I probably listened to it with the same enthusiasm that you had for different reasons. So I did do that. I was so curious. I was curious on a number of levels. I guess I was curious, as I just mentioned, oftentimes, colleagues would come to me as the HR resource for support. And there's one situation that haunts me to this day where we just couldn't find support for this person's husband. Really, the only option was you can go into rehab, and here in Canada, it's many thousands of dollars, and it's not covered by health plans. There's all these reasons why it's complicated. Or you can go to AA, and this person didn't identify with either. And I really, really wanted to support that employee. And there's only a few standout things that come up in my own career that bug me. And that was one of them. I'm like, how was I not, I mean, we've obviously found some resources and we're able to do something. It just didn't feel right. So I was listening to it originally, to be honest, to just understand what you were excited about and how this big shift had happened for you. And I'm always curious to read about things, all things, really. I'm a curious person. But very, very quickly into the book, I don't know. I found it answered that question, frankly. What do we do with, like in my brain, I was like, people who are in between, people who are on their way there, who are not there, like, what do we do there, And so that was a terrific discovery. And then there was also another discovery for me, and this is not about me, it's about you, but I will say this, because I don't drink a lot, and I do have friends who love to enjoy and engage and so on, I'm often found, as sometimes being like the boring one or whatever. I'm not boring at all. I don't think I am anyway. Hopefully I'm not. But you're not drinking as much, or come along with us. And which is I'm completely fine going to the point where I want to go and have my friends go to a different point. I have no concerns about that. And I have no judgment on anyone. And but one of the interesting things in the book is that it did talk about the fact that sometimes when there is someone like me in the room, it reminds others of where they are in comparison to me and where I am, at least on the surface. And I hadn't thought of it that way, I guess, before. So anyway, it was just lots of interesting revelations throughout. But yes, I'm glad I read it. And I'm glad that it had a positive impact on you. I do have a follow-up question for you, though.
Well,
when you talk,
I don't know if I answered your first question, to be honest.
Well, I was just going to say, this is the question I was going to say, when you're driving up, so you're driving up, for your MRI, you're driving back. I listened to it so I can get a sense of the energy that you got from kind of reading those words or listening to them, depending on, whether you've read or listened. But you did say that it was hard. And so I'm curious to know, because you have used with me anyway, the words like, it feels good to have freedom from alcohol. So what does that feel like for you? Like freedom is such a freeing word. So how does it feel? How did you get to the point where you had freedom from alcohol? Because it was probably hard it must have been hard at the beginning. Was it? Like, how did you feel freedom?
It's hard for everybody. So I have a bunch of things I want to say. I'm going to answer that question you just asked me, but I want to say there is now something other than, the options of rehab or AA or, that type of solution. And there are so many options besides that. There's so many options. One of them is the approach of This Naked Mind. And This Naked Mind has some amazing resources for people. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking, oh, that might be me, I don't know, I'm starting to question my relationship with alcohol. This Naked Mind is all about that. It's all about, it doesn't matter what box you think you fit into. If you're questioning a relationship with alcohol, you can change it. It doesn't need to be the way it is. And it's totally okay to be proactive. In fact, it's a great thing to say, this isn't working for me, and just to make changes to that. Unfortunately, alcohol is the only drug that we have to justify not taking.
That's so true.
It's crazy, right? So we know it's a drug. It's a class 1 carcinogenic. It's clearly toxic. Our liver has to work overtime to get rid of it. It's a drug like any other drug. In fact, there's a sort of a spectrum of like where they've classified the level of harm of drugs, and alcohol is the most harmful drug too. So it's a really dangerous drug, but it's the only drug that we have to justify not taking. You would never say to me, if you said, "Oh, hey, Wendy, you want a line of Coke?" And I said, "No, thanks, Julie." You wouldn't be like, "Oh, come on, have a line," But or why not? Why aren't you having it? And so it's a complicated one because it's so prevalent and normalized in our society. So it is a really, really complicated one. But there are options available now for people who fall into the category of what we call gray area drinking. And that's really where I am. And as a coach, those are the people that I support. So there are programs online that you can take. This Naked Mind has some great ones. There's always the free alcohol experiment that Annie Grace runs, which I think is an incredible program. You can always do it for free. And she's committed to always offering it for free, which I think is just so incredible of her and so generous of her. So you can go and do that. You can sign up for that. There also are paid programs that you can do. And of course you can do coaching with someone like me. So now I'm a certified This Naked Mind coach, which we'll talk about in a second. But there are lots of coaches out there who coach one-on-one or who have programs that they offer for people for whom AA, for whatever reason, is not the route that they want to go, and they don't feel like they're a candidate for rehab or an outpatient program or whatever. There are all these in-between things now that are available. To go back to the question that you asked about the freedom piece and it being hard, it is hard. It's always hard in the beginning. And the reason that it's hard is because, I had 20 years of drinking, 25 years of drinking experience before I decided to change my relationship with alcohol. And all of those experiences that I had around alcohol, as well as all of the information that my brain had processed over the 25 years from the media and from my social situations and all of that stuff said drinking is giving you something. So all of that information said alcohol makes things more fun. Alcohol helps you to fit in. Alcohol helps you to loosen up. Alcohol helps you to relax. Alcohol helps you to cope. Alcohol helps you to sleep. There are so many beliefs that we have around alcohol and what it does for us.
And so alcohol makes you fun.
Alcohol makes you fun, right? And so all of those things they're still there, even though you've gotten to a point where you're saying, "Oh, wait a second, I don't know whether this is actually serving me anymore." What happened when I listened to This Naked Mind is that for the very first time, this door opened in my brain that allowed me to think maybe there's a chance my life will actually be better without alcohol. And I had never contemplated that before. I was always just, working from the assumption that life would be worse without alcohol. It was going to be really hard to give it up. It was going to suck. I was going to feel deprived. I wasn't going to be able to have as much fun, relax as well, cope as well, sleep as well, all of those things, right? So when I listened to the book, it opened up the possibility, because Annie Grace is all about experimenting and getting into an experiment mindset, getting curious. And what it did was basically push me to a place where I thought, well, I actually don't know the answer to that. I'm assuming it's going to be this way, but I have no evidence to base that on because I have never been alcohol free, like that. And so I did the 30-day experiment myself. I did the free alcohol experiment online. I got the videos every day that she sends you, and I did the journaling exercises. I did all the work, which is what I tell my clients is they have to do. It's so important that you do that work, because in the process of doing all of that work, what I did was reduce the cognitive dissonance in my brain. So I put some new information in my brain that actually said something completely different from all of the old beliefs that I had in there around alcohol. Things like, wait a second, I'm actually not that much fun when I'm drinking. Wait a second, it doesn't actually help me relax because I am up in the middle of the night every night, at 3 a.m., freaking out about the fact that I drank again when I said I wasn't going to drink. So working through all of that allowed me to reduce my cognitive dissonance. And over time, what happens is it gets easier. But in the beginning, it's still hard. And if you're thinking it's going to be easy, and you're being hard on yourself because it's not easy, I want to encourage you to just back off, like just lay off of yourself. Because the first principle of This Naked Mind is curiosity and that experiment mindset. And the second principle is self-grace or self-compassion. So get out of that cycle of beating yourself up over this. This is not your fault. Alcohol is an addictive substance. And you are one of the millions and millions of people out there who are addicted to this substance. In fact, I just told you, 71% of drinkers wish they drank less. So the majority of drinkers want a different relationship with alcohol, but they're struggling with it. So you have to lay off of yourself. You have to get into that curious mindset, and you have to just take it one day at a time and leave open the possibility that maybe, just maybe, your life might be infinitely better without it. And so the first month was the hardest. The month after that was slightly easier. Every milestone that I went through that I had to deal with, that I had never done alcohol-free, was tough. You know, my first Christmas, my first vacation, my first birthday, you know, all of those celebrations and big events in my life, you have to go through them for the first time without alcohol. And what happens is you show yourself that it actually is pretty great without alcohol, and you build confidence over time. You know, and now at 3 years in, everything's really easy. And this is very, very easy. And when I think about it, I feel completely free. And the way I define freedom when I'm talking to my clients is, you know, you get to that place where you say to yourself, like, I could have a drink, like I'm free to have a drink. I could have a drink tomorrow if I wanted to, but I don't want to. I cannot see why I would have a drink. And I was just saying this actually yesterday to a client I was talking to. You know, I used to say, when people ask me why I stopped drinking, I used to say something like, you know, I got to a point where alcohol was taking more than it was giving. And that felt true for quite a while for me, but now it doesn't feel true anymore, because the truth is, now I feel very clearly that alcohol was only taking. It wasn't giving me anything. You know, for a long time, I still felt like maybe it had been giving me something. But as my cognitive dissonance reduced, I got to a place where now I can say with confidence, it wasn't, I can't think of one thing alcohol gave me except possibly social ease. It's just easier to navigate our society because 84% of people drink. It's easier to not have to explain yourself all the time. But that's about the only thing that it actually gave me. So I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. And, you know, one of the things that one of the reasons because I don't do this kind of stuff normally, but one of the reasons I was happy to be your partner on this episode is that what I think is refreshing about you, and just full disclosure, I did choose to work with my friend Wendy when I was in a situation where I was thinking, I want to take a proactive step so I don't end up burning out. If you recall, that's when our friendship jumped into, I need you on a professional level to support me in this particular regard. And some might think, well, it's easy to trust your friend. For me, it was actually harder to trust my friend, because this meant if I was going to do this properly, Wendy would get to see it all.
Right.
Would get to see everything. And one of the things that I found really relatable is that, and just even in the way you're recounting that story, it's almost as if like you were honest with yourself every step of the way. So where you were saying originally, you know, it was taking more than it was giving, and now I realize it was just taking, is that you really do pay attention to all those moments where the growth occurred, which ended up making you a great coach for the year that we worked together. And I think that honesty will kind of serve you well. I'm going to tell you something interesting. I have a friend in Ontario who received the Naked Mind book for Christmas, and it's on her kitchen counter, and she's not ready to read it yet. And it just made me think earlier when you were saying, you know, if you're questioning it, it's probably the time to take that first step. But I could really relate. You know, for me, it's not alcohol, it's something else. But I could really relate to, like, if I read this book and I have this information, then I'm going to have to do something about it. What would you say to people who are kind of like, I know this book is, I'm just not ready to read it. I'm just going to go to that one baptism or that one. Well, now there's no events going on, but you know what I mean.
Good question. And I'm going to tell you the super honest answer to that, which might surprise you. And that is this, and you may not remember this, but in the very first chapter of this Naked Mind, it might even be the first paragraph. Annie Grace says, you don't need to stop drinking. And that's the only reason why I listened to the entire book. The whole time I was listening to it, I was thinking to myself, I don't need to stop drinking. I don't need to stop drinking. She's going to show me how to control my relationship with alcohol, but I don't need to stop drinking to do that. I can keep drinking. And so I would say, and it's true. So I would say to people who are resisting, who are questioning their relationship with alcohol, I would say, look, just stay in that place of curiosity and don't make any decisions about anything yet. just listen to the book. Because what happened for me, and it happens for a lot of people, is that in the course of listening to the book, it reduced my cognitive, that's what the book does. It starts reducing the cognitive dissonance. I started thinking about alcohol in a very different way. It opened my eyes up to a lot of things, not just in relation to, the harm of alcohol and what it was doing to me, but also to the huge machine that is the alcohol industry that's behind marketing around alcohol and all of this other stuff. And by the time I got to the end of the book, as I said, I was willing to at least contemplate the possibility that I might actually at some point decide to stop drinking altogether. I wasn't even committed to that at this point. I was just like, again, this was just a break. I was on a wine fast, right? And I stayed in that place for a long time. And I've said this many, many times to many, many clients who struggle with this. I did not make a decision to stop drinking forever, ever. I still haven't really made that decision, although, everything tells me that I will never have any interest in drinking again. I just did it on a basically month by month basis. That's how it worked for me. I committed to the 30 days. I wanted to see what it was like to not drink and do this work around cognitive dissonance. And after the 30 days, I asked myself, okay, what's next? Are you going to drink now? And I said, no, I don't think I want to drink right now. And so I'm not going to drink for another 30 days. And I did another 30 days and so on. Eventually I think I changed it to 6 months. And I thought, well, I'll just get to a year, and then at a year, I was like, well, I don't know, what do I do? I'm at a year. Am I going to drink again? What's happening here? And I thought, I just don't want to drink. I have no interest in this. And so I'll just keep going because this feels like the right decision for me. So it doesn't need to be a decision of I'm never going to drink again. Or I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. There's all this stuff in between. And I would encourage anybody who is feeling stressed because they're thinking, that's me, I'm questioning my relationship with alcohol, to first of all, remind themselves of the fact that they are not alone in that. It's such a common place to find yourself. To celebrate the fact that you have that awareness around it. Something's not right. This isn't really serving me anymore. Awareness, and Julie, I've said this to you before, now that you've disclosed that we work together in a coaching relationship, I've said this to you before. Awareness is the most important first step. Without it, we can't make any change. And it always sucks. It's always uncomfortable to realize you've gotten yourself into a place that you don't really want to be. That's always uncomfortable. But without that uncomfortableness, you're never going to move forward and make positive change. So celebrate the fact that you're even questioning your relationship with alcohol, and then move into curiosity. You don't need to commit to anything, and listen to the book. Just listen to it and see where you get to with it. It doesn't need to be that kind of long-term commitment. It's terrifying. And, as Annie Grace and I talked about this when she was on my podcast, if your goal is to never drink again, how will you ever succeed? Because every day, you're saying to yourself, am I there yet? Did I succeed? Nope, I'm still alive. I got another day left. There's no way to actually succeed. And as I said at the beginning of the podcast, it's so important to be able to celebrate successes. And so if you're setting yourself up for an unachievable goal, then you never get the opportunity to succeed. And it just doesn't feel good. So instead, set a goal that you can actually achieve. And if that's a week, great, set a week. I'm not going to drink for this week. I'm just going to get curious for this week. And see where that takes you. You might be very, very surprised what happens when you take that pressure off of yourself. When you say, I'm not going to drink forever, the only way you're going to know you succeeded is after you're dead.
Yeah. When my friend said that, I said, I'm not giving you advice one way or another. I have no advice to give. Do you, and do what feels right for you. I think there's a lot to be said. What is it? So you and I met, or you and I met professionally. So we were engaged in a professional work relationship there for a year. And you still are an amazing coach in that regard. And I can definitely say that you saved me a lot of stress down the road by helping me be proactive about the things that I thought might be coming down the road in terms of, overwork and overwhelm when I was trying to make big changes in my business. But there did come a time, I know, where you were really excited about what this brought to you, and you had made the determination that this might be something you wanted to pursue further. I don't think I ever asked you, what made you decide to become the Naked Mind coach, or how did you get to the point where it had done something for you and then you wanted to do this? Because you were coaching on nutrition, you were coaching, in a lot of different regards, but this was going to take it in a whole other level. So I don't think we ever had a conversation about that moment.
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually, as soon as I started listening to Annie's book, I started thinking to myself, this has application everywhere. So this cognitive dissonance model, and this idea of getting curious and experimenting and extending to yourself the same grace that you would extend to other people, this can be applied to any aspect of someone's life. And I immediately started thinking about it in the context of burnout and some of the other coping mechanisms that had been supporting clients on for years. I had, over the years in my burnout practice, had supported many, many women who struggled with alcohol. Don't get me wrong, that was a piece of the puzzle because it is so common. I just didn't have the tools to help them. So I was doing my best with it, and oftentimes referring them out. But again, I found myself in the place that you said you found yourself as an HR person, where I was like, I don't know where to send these people. I don't know what to do. So when I listened to the book, and as I, got further and further along my own path with alcohol-free life, I started thinking like, I need to figure out how to teach people about this. And I actually incorporated a lot of what I've learned from This Naked Mind and from many of the other resources that Annie suggests in her various videos and things. She is always suggesting other books to read. I read so much stuff that year. And I started working this cognitive dissonance model into my practice without any special training from This Naked Mind on it. I just started using it and was finding that it was having incredible positive impacts on people in terms of, it was just an easy model for people to understand. It takes the blame off you. It explains things in a really clear way as to why it is you're feeling so stuck. And I started sending emails to This Naked Mind. I sent them for about a year saying, hello, might you be considering offering a certification program? Because I am a busy coach who would love to be able to get certified in this and offer this in a more structured way. I'm already using a lot of this in the coaching that I do, but I would love to get formally trained. Anyway, eventually I got an email from them saying that they were opening up a certification program. And then, as you know, because you were involved in this, I angsted about it for a long time because it was a big investment for me, both in time and in money. And I was just kind of back and forth, second guessing myself. And actually you were a big driving factor in that, I think you said to me, Wendy, are you going to regret not doing this? If you don't, so there's a deadline that I had to respond by. And you said, if you don't respond by that deadline, how are you going to feel about it? Are you going to feel good about it or are you going to regret it? And I knew right away I was going to regret it. And so I took the leap and I signed up for the certification, which I think, as I have made clear on this podcast, is one of the best decisions I ever made from a personal perspective and also from a business perspective. And it's led to me now being able to offer in a really formal way, not only This Naked Mind methodology around all coping mechanisms for my clients, but specifically a huge piece of my practice now, Julie. I mean, it's well over 60% of my practice is focused on helping busy women, busy, successful women who find themselves in a place where they're questioning their relationship with alcohol. And it's what I do every day, all day, and I absolutely love it. And I very much rely on that methodology from the book.
And so, one of the things that you and I talked about is the fact that for me, it's something I always have in my toolbox if I'm ever consulting with a client who has someone in their organization who has a struggle, or if they're having this struggle themselves or this challenge. So what is it? I actually don't know that I know the full answer to this, but like, what is it exactly that you offer? So right now, I mean, I know I'm very familiar with the fact that we coached one-on-one, but I assume that you do lots more. Could you tell me a little bit more about that? That would be.
I do. I mean, I generally offer one-on-one coaching. So I have a private coaching practice. It's very busy right now, which is fantastic. So I have a limited number of people that I can take. Sometimes there's a wait list for it, but I'm always happy to talk to people if they're interested in one-on-one coaching. I do one-on-one coaching in relation to burnout and balance for, again, busy, successful women. But I also do burnout and balance coaching for busy, successful women for whom alcohol is their primary coping mechanism. So that is, and again, that's become the bigger part of my practice now. So that's the private coaching in the private coaching realm. And I have a couple of different options for that. But if you do private coaching with me, you are committing to a certain number of sessions. So it's not a one-off, one session type thing. I am excited though now to be able to offer something else, which I haven't been able to offer up until this point. I've just been too busy to do it, but I am going to be rolling out as of probably March 1st, a small group coaching program around alcohol. And I'm super excited about that. So that is going to allow me to help more people. It's also going to be more accessible for people from the perspective of not so much the time commitment, because there will be weekly group coaching sessions in that program, but more accessible in terms of affordability for people. And it's going to be a 6-month program. So I'm excited. I'm going to be able to take people from questioning their relationship with alcohol to freedom from alcohol. That is my goal. So the program is basically designed to do what I do with my private one-on-one clients in a small group coaching format. So that's really exciting. And that's going to be coming as of March 1st. And I'll be talking more about that on upcoming podcasts, and there'll be information on that on my website. And if you're not subscribed to my newsletter yet, you can go and subscribe to my newsletter to get information on that. Or you can just send me an email if you're curious and interested about it. There is a wait list open for that now. If you go to my website, and depending on when you hear this podcast, that waitlist may actually be open for registration. But I will provide that information in the show notes with this podcast.
That's amazing. Well, let me know. I'll sign up. That's for sure.
You're not questioning your relationship with alcohol. You're not going to.
No, but here's the thing. You know what? I'm going to say 2 things, I guess, in closing. We're probably wrapping up nearby. Yeah. One of the things that I would say is, yes, you and I are friends. Yes, you and I also had a professional relationship. But, this is me really encouraging you and your journey, and really celebrating, in particular, the 3 years that you've gone through. But when you think about it, for me, I felt that it was a huge risk to decide to trust someone that was my friend to help me avoid something I didn't want to have in my life, which was burnout. And so for anyone thinking this is just her buddy having a chat with her buddy, to be completely clear, there's no one I would trust more. And I think that trust is really, even though I don't have a challenge with alcohol, I can put myself in the shoes of someone who wants to redefine their relationship with it. And I think that if I put myself in those shoes, and like I said, like everyone has their thing, mine is an alcohol, but if I was going to do this, I would just want to do it with someone that I can really trust. And you've proven to me anyway, time and time again, that I can trust you. And now we're back on the other side where we're friends again. And well, we've always been friends, but where we're just friends. Anyway, and I just can't be more proud of the journey that you've taken. And I'm really excited for everyone that's going to have a chance to connect with what This Naked Mind can bring, or your story, or some part of it in some way, because I think, again, as an HR professional, that connection is really what bonds us all, especially during these times where connection looks a lot different when we're not kind of all in each other's homes. So thank you for being a wonderful friend. Thank you for being a wonderful coach. And I celebrate your 3 years and the many more.
Oh, thank you, Julie. That's very nice of you to say. If you're listening to this podcast and you're looking for support, please reach out to me. If I'm not the right person for you, I'm going to help you find something or someone who is. And in all of my coaching, my goal is to meet people where they are. So whether you're a private client or you're interested in the group coaching program, I don't care where you're starting from. I don't care whether you identify as an alcoholic or not. I don't care where you are on the gray area drinking spectrum. I'm going to try to meet you where you are, and you're going to decide on your path, not me. I'll be there to support you in that, and it will go the way it goes. Everybody's journey in this is very different. If you're listening to my story is not going to be your story, but I hope that what you got from this podcast is that it is possible. There is another way, and your life can actually be incredibly enriched by not drinking. I often say, like, oh, I get to not drink. I didn't think it was a possibility that I could not drink, but now I get to not drink. It's an example of that, framing your goal from the place of abundance and freedom instead of from the place of deprivation. And that's something that I've talked about on many other episodes of this podcast. Julie, I love you. You're the best. I couldn't think of anyone else to host this podcast. I had you in my mind, and I thought, oh, I can't ask Julie, she's so busy. And I was trying to find other people, but the truth is I just really wanted you to be the person to do it because you've been such a great supporter of mine. And I knew you'd do a great job. So thank you again for taking the time today to help me celebrate my 3-year anniversary of being alcohol-free.
You're welcome. Bye, everyone.
You've been listening to Bite Size Balance with your host, Wendy McCallum. As a burnout and alcohol coach, I help busy women like you find freedom from alcohol. If you're ready to start exploring your relationship with alcohol, I've got lots of options for you, including private and group coaching programs. Find out more on my website. Go to www.wendymccallum.com and click on the Freedom from Alcohol tab. That's www.wendymccallum.com. To be sure you don't miss any upcoming bite-sized conversations, subscribe now to this podcast.